Hello, my name is Reverend Craig McDonald, and this video is part of my application materials to become a chaplain with the United States Air Force. In this video, I'm going to talk about my denominational context. I'll talk about my personal ministry. I'll also talk about my desire to be an Air Force chaplain. So I come from the Disciples of Christ Christian church tradition, which was founded in the early 1800s by a father and a son, Thomas and Alexander Campbell. Thomas Campbell was here in the United States, and he was a circuit rider with the Presbyterian Church. So he was an ordained Presbyterian minister, and he was traveling to Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, all sorts of churches out in the frontier, and he was teaching and preaching wherever they needed him. One of the things that he realized, though, is that a lot of folks weren't having communion, which was something he valued. They weren't having communion because a lot of denominations felt that, if you were not part of their denomination, you couldn't receive communion. And the MO of the Presbyterian Church at the time was that if the folks aren't Presbyterian, then you can't serve them communion. So Thomas didn't like that, and so he started serving communion to anybody that wanted it, and eventually he was kicked out of the Presbyterian Church. Now his son Alexander was in Scotland in seminary, and he was experiencing similar hurdles with barriers to communion and also issues with other parts of their polity. So when he and the rest of the family come to the United States, they're amazed because they've been having similar experiences about a lot of the same issues. So they start talking, and along with the help of Barton Stone, they get together and they create the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. Barton Stone coming from a Baptist tradition where a lot of our congregationalist sense comes from. So we have a national body, and we have a regional body, and then we have the individual congregations. Now the national and regional bodies provide a network of support and help to make sure that there's accountability, so that you've got folks going to accredited seminaries, going through background checks, doing psychological evaluations, and that there's no abuse of power or anything like that. They're also helping to collaborate efforts to work together, to pool resources, and to have a larger impact. Also providing support for the local congregations in whatever ways that the congregations express that they would like that. Now, the individual congregations, they have a lot of say in terms of what their polity and what their theology is. So you might go to one congregation somewhere in the United States, and then you'll go to another, and there'll be completely different experiences. This is one of the things that I greatly value about the Disciples tradition, because it embodies a sense of empowerment for the congregation to develop who they are. It allows for freedom of thought, and it allows for freedom of growth of the individual congregations. Now, as for myself, I grew up Methodist, but when I went to seminary, I had to tell them which I had to be on an ordination track, and so I had to decide what that was going to look like. So I did research on several denominations, and I ended up deciding on the Disciples, mainly for two reasons. The first is that my dad had actually been to seminary a couple years before me, and he had decided Disciples, and so I did that. But also, when I was doing the research, that's when I really began to learn about the sort of independence of the congregations, and how it allowed for a freedom of thought, a freedom of expression, and also how the Disciples, they don't have a creed. We've kind of adopted an unofficial creed that's no creed but Christ, but the idea is that there is no tenet of faith, there is no statement of faith that you have to say to be a part or to be a member of the Disciples Church. And that's something I value greatly. Also, communion is central to our beliefs, and we share communion every week, and oftentimes whenever we gather, even if it's not on a Sunday. So, upon graduating seminary, I did my first unit of CPE at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Then I worked at a street ministry downtown called Mercy Community Church, which was comprised of almost entirely folks living on the streets or in some form of subsidized housing. And this was a great experience because it really helped me to jump into an ecumenical thought process. The senior pastor was Pentecostal. I, myself, Disciples. We had two Presbyterian ministers. At one point in time, there was a Methodist minister. And our parishioners came from all sorts of different walks of life, different faiths, different denominations. And that was awesome to be able to work with such a diverse group of people. I later decided that I wanted to work with young adults, and so I moved to Philadelphia. I began working as the youth and young adult minister at Arch Street United Methodist Church, continuing in that strain of ecumenicism that I value. And I also coordinated the alternative spring break program that came to Philly from William and Mary. helping them to see issues going on in Philly and have conversations revolving around that. Additionally, I was working at the Christian Association at the University of Pennsylvania. I was coordinating their mentor program with Upward Bound, and I also was serving in the capacity as a college chaplain through the organization. I later moved down to Atlanta because I was dating my girlfriend's soon-to-be wife, and that's when I jumped into a more traditional role. I began working as an interim minister in North Georgia. After a couple of years, we thought it was a good fit. I decided to stay. They invited me to stay, and then my wife was finishing up her graduate work, so we moved to Atlanta so she could do that. And now we're in Florida so she could get her foot in the door and begin working in her lighted field as well. Since we've been down here, I have been working as a supply preacher, doing weddings, and also I am a certified teacher with the Faith Trust Institute, teaching the healthy boundary courses. It's a requirement for my denomination as well as many others. Now, as far as why I feel called to be an Air Force chaplain, there's a lot of military history in my family, and so the ideas of service is something that I've grown up with. Both my folks are retired Army, and I grew up watching them serve in their ways through their medical expertise, and saw how they valued service and saw how the Army helped them to grow as individuals, to grow as leaders, and to value teamwork and being part of a team. So that's something I would greatly value. Now, both my grandparents also served in the military. On my mother's side, my grandfather was with the Army Corps of Engineers. And on my father's side, he was a pilot in the Air Force, Army Air Corps at the time, and he flew with the carpetbaggers during World War II. I also am interested in working in an ecumenical and an interfaith environment. I think having those things around is very healthy for everyone, and I find that environment life-giving, and I would love to be a part of that, to support people who come from my tradition, but to also support people who come from other traditions and to find value in that and to share that, to make a place for those folks. I greatly respect the folks that serve our country, particularly the airmen and women of the United States Air Force. And I value the way in which that we can take care of them through taking care of them in their mental health, their physical health, their emotional health, and through their spiritual health. And I see walking with them through their journey of understanding who God is and who God is calling them to be, how God is calling them to serve our country. I see that as my calling. And so with all that in mind, it is my pleasure to submit this video. So thank you so much for the opportunity to apply, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.